thank you so much for having me here. So my name is Grace Marshall. I will be your productivity ninja for today. That's my official job title. That's actually what it says on my business cards if we were to meet in person, or on my LinkedIn profile, which you can check out later, not right now. I'm part of a team at Think Productive where we are on a mission to transform the way that people work. So to help people find ways of working with less stress and less overwhelm and more what we like to call playful, productive momentum. So what we're really interested in isn't necessarily how do we get people to do more work, but actually how do we all do our best work, have fun doing it, and have a life outside of work. So if that sounds good to you, that is what we are all about. Two words you're not going to hear me say very much of today are the words time management. And that's because we find that even the words time management have us focused on the very thing we actually can't manage. So as much as we'd love to, we can't control time. We can't make it go faster or last longer. I often say it's a little bit like trying to control children, animals, or the aging process. You know, there are some things that seem to start working, but it never seems to go all the way. So instead of trying to manage time itself, let's look at some of the things that we can manage, that we have a little bit more control over. So as we go through this session, I'll be introducing you to maybe thinking about how we manage our attention, our energy, our choices, our behaviors, maybe even how we communicate with each other, because actually those things have a much bigger impact on how well we use our time compared to trying to manage time itself. So it's my pleasure today to introduce you to what we call the 9 characteristics of a productivity ninja. These are 9 different lenses and perspectives, mindsets, if you like, that you can deploy into your working life to think about how you work in slightly different ways, and also some very practical tips and tools that you can deploy to basically help you to get more done, but have fun doing it and have that life outside of work as well. So to support you on this continuing journey to Ninja, so at the end of the session, I will be sharing a link with some resources to support you. So you will be able to see the slides again. So that will be on our Productivity Ninja Academy, along with a whole host of resources. There are some guides, walkthroughs, videos to help you to refresh yourself with what we've covered today, but also dive deeper into anything that we've touched on today, as well as your own personal copy of the book, How to Be a Productivity Ninja. I noticed earlier in Robin's background, he's got our very first edition of it. We've actually got, this is the latest version, so you'll be able to download your own personal copy of that in the Academy, and I'll share how you can get hold of all of that with a link at the end of this session. So let's start then with Zen-like calm. I wonder who'd like a bit more Zen-like calm in their working life. So the idea of Zen is really interesting. It's not the absence of chaos. So it's actually the fact that you can have 101 things going on at any given time, but right now you are absolutely focused. You're in the zone, and you're confident that what you're focused on is the most appropriate thing. So that's the idea of Zen. I wonder whose reality is a little bit more like this. Could you just pop your hand up if you feel like, yeah, that explains a lot. That's a good representation of my brain right now. Okay, yep. Quite a few hands going up, I think. Brilliant. Okay, so welcome to the age of information overload and the mind of the modern worker. So I think this is a really great image of how the human brain works. So the human brain is brilliant at coming up with ideas, but it's not that great at remembering stuff, and certainly not that great at remembering stuff in an organized fashion. So there are all sorts of things here on these post-it notes, like solve global warming, big things like that, little things like pick up milk, work-related things like get back to my boss, personal things like call mom on Sunday. And when we keep everything on our heads, it all gets jumbled up. So the big things, the small things, the work-related, the personal, all gets mixed up. And so this explains why you might have had an experience where you're in the middle of something really important at work and your brain goes, we've run out of milk, need to buy some milk today. Or you're at home trying to relax, trying to spend time with your friends, with your family, or just trying to get some sleep. And your brain goes, that email I need to send, or that meeting I need to prepare for. So that's all to say that our brain is a terrible place to retain information. So a ninja needs a second brain We need a better way to download all this information, a trusted system where we can keep it all so that we can actually get things out of our heads and clear the headspace we need to do the thinking around this. So David Allen has a great way of putting this. He says, your mind is for having ideas, not for holding them. So the more stuff we keep in our heads, the less headspace we've got to do the kind of strategic thinking, creative thinking, problem solving thinking that we actually need to do, use our brains for. And really, headspace is our most precious resource in today's world of work, because we don't work in the industrial age anymore, where we might have worked with our hands. We all work in the information age now, where we work with our heads. But if I can invite you to cast your mind back, so if anyone here has ever had like a factory line job, or even if you haven't, if you just imagine you worked in a cake factory and your job was put cherries on cakes. So imagine there's a big conveyor belt coming round. You've got a big box of cherries. The person before you has just put the icing on the cake. And all you have to do all day long is put a cherry on a cake, cherry on a cake, cherry on a cake. Like, that's it. If the conveyor belt speeds up, you speed up. If it slows down, you slow down. If it stops, you wait, because there's nothing else for you to do. Now, aside from that being really boring and repetitive and monotonous work, I wonder if you might like to share either in the chat or the questions, is there anything attractive about that kind of work? So what kind of things might have been attractive to you about that kind of work? And Robin, if you could maybe just let us know what's coming through on the chat or the questions.
Yeah, of course. Focus on one task. It's not chaotic, stress-free. Calmly know exactly what to expect. Lots more about stress. Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting, isn't it? So
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of work that we would have done back in the industrial age was highly defined. That's why it was stress-free. We knew exactly what job done looked like, exactly what success looks like, and there's no thinking to be done because the thinking's been done for us. Whereas the kind of work we do nowadays, it's almost like we're having to put cherries on cakes, and there are things that we have to do and deliver and get out the door, but we're also maybe responsible for deciding how fast should that conveyor belt go around so that all the cakes are going out fresh. And we might be responsible for the rest of the team. So the person who does the icing hasn't shown up today, who's going to do their job instead? We might also be technical support. So if the conveyor belt breaks, we're the ones who have to go and fix it so that everybody else can get on with their job. Or we might have to think strategically. So looking into the wider world, everybody's talking about healthy eating these days. Should we even be putting cherries on cakes? Or should we be looking to change our business model and start putting cherries in fruit salads instead? So the kind of work that we do as knowledge workers, it's almost like we're having to be the boss and the worker at the same time. So whatever level of the organization we're in, we all have to do our own version of boss thinking, where we define what job done looks like, what success looks like, and where those start and finish lines are. And then we need to go into worker mode to actually get the work done. And these two modes of working are done better when they're done separately. So stress often comes from either mixing the two up. So for example, you go in worker mode and you're ready to get some work done and you go, oh, what am I supposed to be doing here? And that will get stressful. But what also comes from spending too much time in one mode and not enough time in the other. So for example, if we're always in boss mode, thinking, deciding, strategizing, but never actually getting the work done, that's going to feel stressful eventually. But more often, what we can end up doing is spending too much time in worker mode, or all of our time in worker mode. And so we're working hard, we're working maybe longer hours, super busy, trying to get everything done, and maybe not spending any time in boss mode. We can end up finding ourselves working harder and longer hours without necessarily getting the results that we want. And it's amazing how often people say to me, do you know what, Grace, I don't give myself enough time to think, because thinking doesn't feel like work. I feel like I need to be doing something, clicking something, saying something in order to feel like I'm doing that worker mode, and that's what feels productive. But actually, if we're knowledge workers, which means that we add value with the thinking that we do, then maybe actually we need to create more of that thinking space for ourselves, more of that boss mode thinking space, and to see that as equally, if not more productive than the clicking and the doing and the busyness and the activity. So that leads me very nicely on to number 2, which is ruthlessness. Because ruthlessness is not about getting your worker self to work harder. It's actually about getting your boss self to make good choices. And it's about knowing that fundamentally, as as much as we'd love to, as far advanced as the technology has become or the human race has become, as many training courses as we can go on, we still can't do everything. And we kind of know that, don't we? We know that it's impossible to get absolutely everything done, but we think surely if everything is the holy grail, then the more stuff I do, the more productive I'm going to be, right? But there comes a point where more becomes less, where actually when there's too much going on, what ends up happening is that we dilute our impact and we spread ourselves thin. And that means that actually we end up feeling less productive. So for example, when there are too many emails in your inbox, it all becomes noise and you lose the signal. When there are too many meetings in the diary, when's the actual work going to get done? But even when there are just too many things on your to-do list, it can get overwhelming and we end up scanning up and down, maybe procrastinating, maybe cherry picking, or maybe just reacting to the stuff that's shouting the loudest, rather than necessarily what's going to create the biggest impact. So when it all gets too much, we stop discerning between what's actually going to create impact, what's going to take us forwards towards our goals, so the actions that are going to create impact, compared to maybe the activity that's just going to keep us busy. So what we find is that less is more. So sometimes what's stopping us from being productive isn't that we're not doing enough, it's that we're trying to do too much. So maybe we need to start to embrace our constraints and use limits to kind of go, well, okay, what things are we actually going to say no to so that I can actually focus my best attention on what's going to create the biggest impact. It's also about protection, about protecting our most precious resources. And most people would say, well, yeah, that's my time because I always feel like I don't have enough of it. But actually, I would argue that time without attention is completely useless, and our attention is even more limited than our time. So you might have, say, 8 hours of time to work in a day, but not each hour of that time is equal. In fact, most studies suggest that our proactive attention, so time when our attention is at its best, is only about 2 or 3 hours of that. But our attention is really fragile. It's really easily broken and really hard to put back together again. And so they did a study at Microsoft where they had a bunch of people working on something that required a certain level of mental investment. So they were writing reports, designing software, fixing bugs in the code. And they interrupted them with 1 minute interruptions. So if you imagine somebody coming up to you saying, hey, have you got a minute? Or a 1 minute phone call, or a 1 minute email. And even if genuinely the interruption only took a minute to deal with, I wonder if you can hazard a guess, how long do you think it would take you to recover your attention and get back to the thing that you were doing? So for example, to like reread the last paragraph and think, where was I up to? How many minutes would it take you, do you think, to get back to the thing that you were doing before? Let us know what you think in the questions. I can see there's, anything ranging from about 4 minutes to 20 minutes, 60 minutes. Not sure, think it depends. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we have people saying, maybe never. Maybe I go off on the tangent and then get distracted by something else and I'd never come back to the thing that I was doing before. So in this particular study, what they found was the average was about 15 minutes. So 15 minutes to recover your attention from a 1 minute interruption. So if you think about it, that would mean it would only take 4 badly timed interruptions to suck up a whole hour of your day. So sometimes when we feel like we don't have enough time, maybe actually what we don't have enough of is our attention to make good use of our time. And in fact, a more recent study in 2014 found that the recovery time in that particular study was about 23 minutes and 15 seconds. So it feels like it's just getting worse. So it would only take 3 badly timed interruptions to suck up a whole hour of your day. So what I'd love to know, and we've got a poll coming up for this, is who or what distracts you most from getting things done? So what are some of your biggest distractions? What are some of your culprits for distractions? So Robin, I wonder if you could launch that poll for us. Okay, so, right, let's share those results then. Emails, by far the highest. 54% of you have gone for emails, 22% people. Phone calls, 10%. Social media, not so much, 8%. Some of you said other as well. Let's see what's come up in that. So we've got, yeah, colleagues, instant messages, phone calls from customers, Teams. Yeah, Teams is a big one that comes up a lot. Skype, myself. Yeah, we can distract ourselves as well. Absolutely. Okay, let's stop sharing that poll now. So, yeah, it's a noisy world out there, isn't it? And arguably, it's a noisy world in here as well. So what we need to do is look for ways to maybe tame or tone down some of that noise. So the next couple of characteristics is going to help us with that. So the first is what we call weapon savvy. So weapon savvy is about using your tools well to serve us rather than the other way around. So one of the things that we talk about as a productivity ninja is that the tool is only ever as good as the person who's using it. So sometimes people go, well, tell me what apps I should use, just give me the technology and that's going to help to make me more productive. And yes, there are lots of different tools out there that can help, but the tool is only ever as good as the person who's using it. So let's look at one particular tool which came up top of the polls there, which is email. So how well is email working for you as a tool, I wonder? Could you pop into the questions, maybe one word to describe your current relationship with email? So how do you feel about email? Give me one word to describe that. And I can see James is saying, I've learned to be an email ninja recently. Brilliant. So James, you're ahead of the curve there. Okay, so we've got words like hate, complicated, too much spam. I read it, then never go back to it. Yeah. Chaotic, firefighting, time stealer. Okay, some of us feeling good about email, great. Others are feeling disorganized, overloaded, overwhelmed, distracted, unavoidable. Yeah, and love hate is another one we get a lot. Yep, slave is coming up as well. I feel like a slave to my email. Yeah, and it's frustrating, absolutely. So a couple of things when it comes to email. If you think about your physical post, the postman only comes, what, once a day, not even twice a day anymore. I wonder, how would you feel if the postman started knocking on your door every 2 minutes to deliver every single piece of post individually? You'd probably have words, wouldn't you? So why is it that we feel like we need to see that email as soon as it lands and even sometimes reply to it straight away? So email itself was, yes, you can email at any given time, but that's the benefit of email, but that's also the curse of email. And in fact, email was never designed to be an emergency tool. So maybe instead of having those notifications on, instead of having email open all the time and having it distract you every single time a new email lands into your inbox, perhaps we can start to turn off the notifications to begin with. So, turning off the notification, the little ping, the little pop-up, because let's face it, as human beings, we are wired to respond to things that ping and pop up. But also maybe deciding, rather than looking at email straight away as it arrives, maybe we can decide to look at emails maybe 3 times a day, or maybe 10 minutes at the top of every hour. So rather than having an always on relationship with email, what would it look like to have an on-off relationship with email? So there are times when you dive in and you can see what's come in and you can process and deal with, make decisions about what you need to deal with and what you don't need to deal with. But also times when you come away from email, when you close it all down and you can have your brain to yourself and actually focus on the work that exists outside of your inbox. The other thing to realize is that not every single email that lands in your inbox is equally important. So I don't know if anyone's come across the 80-20 rules. The 80-20 rule is that 80% of your results comes from 20% of your actions. When it comes to email, it can be more like the 800-20 rule. So for every for every 20 pieces of vital, actionable, useful emails that you get, there could be somewhere in the region of 800 lower value, noisy emails. So definitely not every single email requires the same amount of attention. But if we deal with things individually as and when it comes in, it can be very easy to end up reacting to everything as if it's equally important. So the good news is if you've got 1,000 emails in your inbox right now, you haven't got 1,000 things to do. And what we need to do is get into the habit of processing emails, which means rather than actioning all of them, you're going through in boss mode, deciding what needs my action, what doesn't need my action, what do I delete? And it's almost like treating your inbox like the doormat where the post lands. So you don't go and pick up everything from the doormat, look through it all, and then put it all back on the doormat, do you? You pick it up, you bin the stuff you don't need, you file the stuff that you just need to keep for reference, and the things you actually need to do, you take to your desk. Or you put somewhere like into a to-do pile or a tray or something like that to go, right, that's the stuff I need to pay attention to. And so the same thing holds true with email. Getting into the habit of processing emails is a really good way of like filtering through all the stuff that you don't need to pay attention to, filtering through the noise, and then having a clear idea of here's the stuff I actually need to pay attention to. And that's what we teach in what we call our inbox zero technique. So those of you who feel like a ninja, email ninja already, you might already be doing this. Those of you who are intrigued by that or thinking, gosh, no, you haven't seen my inbox. Let me encourage you by telling you that in our Getting Your Inbox to Zero workshops, we basically have a half-day workshop where we help people, we show them how they actually get their inboxes to zero during that time. We have seen 5-figure inboxes. So it is absolutely doable. And it doesn't mean you have to go through each one individually. If you want to know more about the Inbox Zero technique, then I definitely recommend you go straight to chapter 4 of the book when you download the book with the link at the end of the session, because that is our Ninja email chapter, and that will tell you everything that you need to know about the Inbox Zero technique. But the final thing I will say about email, I noticed that somebody has popped into the questions panel, wrong use of CC and to, for example, and colleagues, and response time. So the final thing, on email is it's not just about our own individual habits, it's also about the culture. So culture is always, a bit of a collection of individual habits. So what's the email culture like? What are the collective expectations around email when it comes to your workplace? And so sometimes it's worth having a conversation to check in on that culture, but also to be more deliberate about shaping that culture. And so, often we default to email being the first kind of point of call when it comes to communication, whereas email isn't always the best tool to have a conversation. Sometimes we default to expecting instant responses with email, so it feels like everyone has to be instantly responsive. But is that really the case? So maybe having a conversation about email and what are the expectations around email, what are the response times, what are some good rules of engagement, how do we use the to, the CC, the BCC, do we really have to copy everybody in, do we really have to reply to all and say thank you? Those kind of conversations are really good to have. And actually you can facilitate a conversation around that and maybe come up with what we call a comms manifesto. So almost kind of, here's our email etiquette, here's the kind of rules of engagement around email, and that will make life much easier and make email much more productive tool for you collectively as well. Okay, so the other thing that we also need to look at is managing our availability. So linked with how responsive are we going to be on email is also just generally how responsive do we need to be for other people. So most of us do the kind of work where there's work that we have to do that you need your brain to yourself for, that you need to get your head down and focus, but also there's work that you need to do that involves collaboration and communication and being responsive and supportive to other colleagues. And so there's a bit of a tension there that we need to hold. And sometimes what happens is that we tend to have an open door policy, we're always available to other people, or we just feel like we need to get back to people as quickly as possible. Maybe because we don't want to be the bottleneck, or maybe because we feel like if you're not responsive enough, particularly when we're working from home, then there might be a question mark over how productive you're being if you're not responding to emails straight away, or you're responding to other people's kind of Teams messages and things like that. But when we do too much of that, as we've already found out, we get too distracted and then we get no focused attention available. So you might want to deploy some stealth and camouflage from time to time, which might look like tactical hiding. So physical hiding, maybe spending time away from your desk if you work in an open office, maybe hiding in a meeting room or going to a different site. If you're working at home at the moment and home is really distracting, it might be actually, how can I maybe create some signs or some signals to say, like, don't disturb, or no, I don't need a cup of tea right now. But equally, increasingly at the moment, it's probably more digital stealth and camouflage that we might need to deploy. So it might be from time to time working offline. Outlook has a work offline button that you can use. So if you do need to dive into emails to like look for information, but you don't want to be distracted by new emails coming in, you could use the work offline button. Or maybe if you don't need to be online at all, maybe coming off the Wi-Fi and going dark for a while. Perhaps putting your team status onto Do Not Disturb or your phone onto Do Not Disturb. And those are all different ways of maybe just creating a little bit of a bubble for your attention to protect your attention from everything else that's going on around you. So this isn't to say that you're never available for other people, but it is about managing your availability. So there are times where you are fully available for others, and then there are times when you have your brain back to yourself. And a key part of this is communication. It's communicating that with each other, because otherwise people won't know what to expect, or you might find that kind of people get frustrated that you're not getting back to them as quickly as they'd like. So it might be kind of maybe having some conversations around this to let people know, okay, I've got this big piece of work to get my head down and do. I'm going to go dark, I'm not going to be available for the next 3 hours. If there's an emergency, give me a call, but otherwise I'll be back online in 3 hours time. And equally, it might be the other way around. It might be saying, here's when I'm fully available for questions. If you've got questions, pop it in here. I'll be on here, like I've got an open office hour, and I'll answer any questions that you like. So those are different ideas around how you might be able to reclaim some of your attention. So I'm going to pause there before I move on to the next few characteristics. And I wonder if you have any questions, please pop them into the question panel. And Robin, can you see the questions now?
I can indeed. I don't have a good question that came through. I thought that's a good idea. Someone's asked if there is a way to just show your calendar on Outlook and not your emails.
Oh, good question. I'm not sure if you can completely not show your emails, but what you can do, the couple of things you can do. One thing is you can start your Outlook in calendar mode rather than in inbox. So if you go to your Outlook sort of advanced options in terms of startup, the Outlook, I think it's called Outlook Startup, that section, normally Outlook starts up in inbox, but you can actually set it to start anywhere else. So it could be like in your tasks, or it could be in your calendar. So that's a good way of kind of checking with your calendar first rather than with your inbox. But the other thing you could do as well is have it on calendar mode and then go on to work offline, so you don't see the new emails coming in, and definitely turn off the notifications that tell you you've got new emails.
Great, hopefully that one will help. Someone wants to know if any tips on assessing when you're spreading yourself too thin.
Okay, so when you're spreading yourself too thin, I think it's recognizing, so maybe having a time when you're reviewing your workload to go, okay, there's too much going on, what do I need to say no to? And maybe reprioritizing, negotiating, look at what you can delete, look at what you can delegate, look at what you can ring fence. It's like, okay, I can only give this project this amount of time. And by employing those kind of constraints, it will help you to almost force you to focus your mind on like, okay, if I'm only giving this 1 hour, what's the most important thing to do here? Or if I can only give this 1 day, what kind of things are going to make the cut, what's not going to make the cut? And even from a daily perspective, if you're looking at like a giant long to-do list, maybe even grabbing a post-it note and going, if I can only fit 5 things into today, what 5 things are going to make the cut? And like writing that on a post-it note, stick it to your screen. And if you've got a day like where half your day is full of meetings already, then maybe fold that post-it note in half and write like what 1 or 2 things can I get done today?
Not a question. We have got more questions. I want to throw in quickly here that someone has just said, brilliant session so far with some very valuable practical tips. Just need to be bold and get into the habits. So there we go. Positive feedback already coming in. Another one, other people may be asking as well, how do you work offline in Outlook?
Okay, so there is a work offline button. Off the top of my head, I think it's just in the homepage. But if you can't see it, just Google it, Google work offline in Outlook, and you'll probably find a tutorial that tells you exactly where to find that button. But yeah, there should be a work offline button that you can just press, and it will just basically pause your inbox and allow you to work offline.
She has just responded to say she's found it. It's in the send receive.
Excellent.
Do you have time for one more question, or should we move on to the next one?
Okay, I'll take one more and then we'll move on.
That's a good idea. Right, let's find a good one. Okay, if I get an email, I want to put it onto the to-do pile. How do I do that? I feel like I flag better. Never go back to it. I'm not really sure that.
Yes, yeah. The problem with flags is that it kind of all drops down, doesn't it? And then you can't see it. And if it's out of sight, it's out of mind. And then you end up with just like a list of flagged emails that go red at the top. So a couple of things. One is that in our inbox zero technique, we actually advocate having an action folder that you put things in. And so that's one place that you look for all your actions. The other thing is to consider, I mentioned a second brain earlier, so this is like a wider list of like everything I need to get done. So whether that's projects, actions, having it all in one place. So it might be that there are certain emails that you forward into your second brain, or you write into your second brain to go, right, here's something I need to do, especially if that email isn't like just an email I need to reply to. Maybe that email actually represents a whole project that I need to do. Then get that out of email and into your second brain, because then you can map it out and you can figure out what's the next action, what's the wider project, what are the different elements of it. So that's what I would say to that. Brilliant. Okay, thank you for all those questions. Keep the questions coming in and we'll try and answer as many of them as we can. But for now, let's move on to unorthodoxy, because unorthodoxy is about challenging the status quo. So sometimes we get stuck in a rut. Sometimes we default to our routines, to our habits, and to an extent that can be productive because we're not having to reinvent the wheel all the time. But there comes a point where sometimes things get stale, and sometimes we're just doing things the way we've always done it, just because we've always done it that way. So it might be time to maybe shake things up, maybe look for ways of doing things differently, and maybe getting our inspiration from some fresh perspectives. So to give you one example of this, my favorite one out of all of these is the little guy in the Batman costume. What question do children ask more than anything else? It's the question why. Drives you crazy, but it's a really good question to ask. So why do we always do things like that? It might be asking, why do we always have that same team meeting on a Wednesday afternoon where everybody's saying the same thing and nobody's really listening? Or why do we still do that report? Does anyone even read it? Or it might be, why do I always look at my phone first thing in the morning, last thing at night? Maybe because it's on charge next to the bed. And so sometimes when we channel our inner 6-year-old and ask some of those why questions, we start to realize, maybe what used to serve a purpose doesn't serve a purpose anymore. And that's when we can start to conduct some of our own productivity experiments. So it might be, what if we took away that team meeting? Would anybody miss it? What if we stopped publishing that report? Would anybody miss it? Sometimes when something goes stale, the temptation is to replace it straight away. But maybe instead of doing that, it can be useful to just remove it completely and see if a hunger develops. And if that hunger develops, then you can put something in place that actually meets that need. And you can do that clearly. So you might be looking for ways of removing things that you don't think are serving a purpose anymore. Or it might be challenging. What if I plugged my phone in downstairs instead of next to the bed? Would that change my habits? And the beauty of experimenting is that it doesn't have to be perfect or foolproof or bomb-proof. It's just about having an idea, putting it to the test, and seeing what happens. And it's also a really great way to get other people involved as well. So if you want to experiment with your working habits or your working patterns, and you think, oh, I'm not sure if my line manager would be happy with that. I'm not sure how the rest of my team would feel about that. You could propose it as a trial basis to say, hey, can we give this a go for 3 weeks? And if we hate it, we can go back to the way we were doing it before, but could we give it a go and see what happens? And always when you experiment, sometimes it goes to plan, sometimes it doesn't, but always you'll learn something. And it's that learning that we take forwards. Unorthodoxy is also about kind of playfulness and gamification, because sometimes when the work gets too serious, it gets kind of overpowering, overbearing, and we end up procrastinating. So one example of this would be the idea of eating a frog for breakfast. I don't know, some of you might have already come across this before. There's a little book by Brian Tracy called Eat That Frog. I believe it's also a Mark Twain quote, but basically, if you eat a frog for breakfast, everything afterwards is going to taste sweet. So your frog is the unpleasant task that's been hanging around on your to-do list like a bad smell. And the thing about frogs is the longer you leave it, the worse they're going to smell. So instead of leaving it hanging around, the idea is if you eat your frog for breakfast, so get that unpleasant task out of the way, over and done with first thing in the morning, then two things happen. One, weight off your shoulder. It's like, that's amazing. It's not nagging at me anymore. But the second thing is that you set yourself up for the rest of the day because you've already done the worst thing. It's over and done with. So like everything else is going to be easy by comparison. So eating a frog for breakfast can be something you do individually as your own kind of personal habit, but it can also be something that you do with an accountability partner. So I know someone who has a fortnightly frog hunting meeting with a colleague where they get together and go, what's your frog, what's my frog, and then they hold each other accountable. I also know some teams who've started implementing frog hour. So an hour in the week where you come together, everybody confesses their frog into the circle. If you're really lucky, your frog might be someone else's treat. And someone else might go, oh yeah, I don't mind doing those. Yeah, I'll swap with you. Or you might get help from someone else. So they might say, I had a similar thing last week. Let me send you what I did on that, and you can use that as a starting point. And then if, even if you have to go and eat your frog yourself, what you've done is you've created some accountability and some camaraderie. So you've actually got someone checking in on you to go, have you done it? And you've got someone to celebrate with when you have done that, and that will feel good as well. Okay, next one is agility. So, often that we work in a world where things are going to be changing. So uncertainty, change, that's the norm these days. So we know that we can't just plan the week at the beginning of the week and have everything run like clockwork. So those days are long gone. So we do need to have a level of flexibility, a level of responsiveness to deal with things as and when they change. But sometimes what happens is that we end up feeling like we're reacting to everything. We're on the back foot for everything. It might feel like we're dealing with, we're firefighting all the time. It feels like maybe you open up your laptop and this is what it feels like from a day-to-day perspective. And so if this is how it feels at the moment, it's worth asking ourselves, actually, how do the firefighters fight fires, so professional firefighters? And I actually spoke to one a little while ago, local to me in Stafford in the Midlands, and he said, well, I actually only spend about 10% of my time fighting fires. The other 90% of my time I spend on prevention and education. So the bulk of it is on doing talks at universities, telling students to buy their chips and not to fry them, or going into the community and doing smoke alarm tests and making sure that people have got working smoke detectors. And actually, if for us, if you feel like you're constantly firefighting, it might be worth asking yourself, hang on a minute, what fires are we fighting on repeat? Where can we do some fireproofing? Where can we do some prevention, some education, so that there are less fires to fight? If we're always dealing with what's quick and immediate, we kind of need to make sure we're not doing this, because this would be pretty demoralizing, wouldn't it? And there are two ways of looking at this picture. So either that tornado is going to come and ruin my good work, or maybe that tornado will come and do my work for me. So if we know that change is inevitable, we need to make sure that we're doing some horizon scanning from time to time. So it can be tempting to be stuck in our inbox going, oh, what's the next thing that I need to do? But also we need to get our head above the parapet. So maybe having a weekly review where you deliberately move away from the quick and the immediate and you look at the bigger picture and you start to do some horizon scanning to go, okay, what's been changing over the last few weeks? What's coming up? What does that mean I need to put in place now so that I'm not creating a fire for somebody else? But also, what's changed in terms of maybe what was a priority 3 weeks ago is no longer a priority now. So maybe there's something I can take off my list by doing some of that horizon scanning and some of that renegotiation. But also agility isn't about multitasking. So a lot of people feel like if I've got so much to do, the only way I can get it all done is to get really good at multitasking. But actually, multitasking is a myth. So what happens when we're trying to multitask is we're actually rapidly refocusing. And when we do that, what ends up happening is that we divide our attention. So there's a switching cost every time we refocus. And that switching cost actually makes us twice as likely to make mistakes and on average 30% slower. If you don't believe me, we'll do a semi-scientific experiment. So if you grab something to write with and something to write on, and if I can invite you to just write for me the word multitasking, and then underneath write the numbers 1 to 12. So if you write multitasking and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I'll just give you a few seconds to do that. Okay, so that should be pretty easy, just writing a word and then writing some numbers. This time round, what I'd like you to do is write the first letter and then the number. So you're writing M1, U2, L3. You can look at your first one if you like, if you want to refer back to it and copy, but the idea is you write one letter, one number, one letter, one number. So have a go at doing that this time. Okay. So those of you who did that, tell me how that felt. How did it feel the second time round? What did you find? What did you notice?
So
So Robin.
took more concentration, harder than they thought on the second time round, more stressful, had to constantly think. Yeah, I don't like doing that either. Turned out messy the second time round. Actually wasn't too difficult for some people. Someone made a mistake in their spelling.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember writing Christmas cards one year when my daughter was 3 and she was getting really excited about Christmas. So she was like, is it Christmas yet, Mummy? Is it Christmas yet? Is it Christmas yet? With the repetition and tenacity that only a 3-year-old has. And I ended up signing off one card, lots of love, Grant, Grace, Oliver, and Christmas. It's like, it's not hard to write a Christmas card, but it's so easy to make a mistake when you're multitasking. So I don't know if anyone's ever sent the email to the wrong person, or sent it to the person you're talking about rather than the person you're talking to, who then that's always very awkward. But the basics of this is we make the work harder and we make ourselves slower and also make ourselves far more likely to make mistakes when we try to multitask. So it's far better to focus on what we call serial monotasking. Do one thing, do it to a sensible level of completion, then move on to the next thing. And what can also help with that is batching up similar tasks. So do all your letters, then all your numbers instead of switching between like different tasks. But also just making sure that you're not giving yourself too much to do at the same time, or fooling yourself into thinking that that is a better or a quicker way of getting things done. Okay, so then let's move on then to mindfulness. So if multitasking was a way of training our brain for distraction, mindfulness is almost the opposite. It's a way of training our brain for attention, for paying attention. So mindfulness might be just paying attention to how I'm working, the way that we're working, not just the work that we need to do. And that's kind of what we've been doing in today's session. But it can also be formal mindfulness. So if you've ever done things like meditation, yoga, breathing exercises, you'll know that it's a great way of switching your brain off for a while. One of my favorite authors, Anne Lamott, says almost everything will work again if you switch it off and on, including you. And so mindfulness can be a great way of switching your brain off so that when you switch back on again, you're like, okay, I can think clearer, I can deal with problems easier, and just generally be in a calmer state. If you haven't tried it before, there are some apps that can make it really easy. So things like Headspace, Calm, those are all apps that can be quite easy to just plug and play and listen and follow the instructions if you want to give that a go. But if anyone's thinking, oh, I'm not sure if that's my thing, you can also practice mindfulness with ordinary everyday activities. So this might be just doing something you enjoy doing, whether that's cooking, dancing, singing. I've started playing the violin again. I used to play as a child. I gave up when I was about 16. And a couple of years ago, I started playing again. And I tell you what, there's nothing like a page full of semiquavers to take my mind completely off work, because I cannot think about anything else when when I've got that in front of me. I've had some people say to me, ironing they find mindful, whereas for me, ironing is my frog. So this will be pretty personal to you. But maybe having one or two things that you know that you can do that helps you to be completely absorbed, completely immersed in the moment, and something that's enjoyable for you. And you'll find that if you kind of entertain that now and again and use that almost as a way of taking a break from work, you'll find that when you get back to work, your brain is fresher. You're able to do better thinking and feel better about the work as well. It's also about perspective. If we're always up against the coalface, it's really hard to see how far it's really hard to see where we're going for a start, but it's also really hard to see how far we've come. So maybe taking some time from time to time to just go, rather than like, what's next? How far have we come? Maybe celebrating successes and acknowledging your progress. There's a really interesting piece of research that suggests that as human beings, we actually have 3 times more positive experiences than negative ones. But it doesn't always feel like that, because we have a negativity bias. So if loads of things go well and like one thing goes wrong in your week, what's the thing you tend to take away with you and sort of replay in your head and take into the weekend? It's usually the thing that goes wrong. So to counteract that, what we can do is actively celebrate or actively practice the art of celebrating success. So it might be starting your meetings with what's your good news instead of or before you move on to what are the problems we need to solve. Or it might be writing yourself a ta-da list instead of a to-do list. So ta-da, here's what I have done. Especially if you've had one of those weeks when you feel like you've been really busy, if you have no idea what you've gotten done. Give yourself 5 minutes and write yourself a ta-da list. I guarantee you'll feel better after that. Celebrating success and being mindful is a great way of being mindful. Next up is preparedness. So those of you who are naturally organized, this is probably something that you do really easily. For everybody else, I would call this one giving my future self a gift. So your current self might not feel like this, but your future self is going to thank you for it. One element of preparedness will be things like checklists. Checklists are a great way of doing some thinking up front, and then you can basically go into work mode and just follow the instructions. So if you've got things that you do on a repeat basis, so maybe it's a monthly report or an annual event, having a checklist means that you need to do the thinking once, and then you can just go through it over and over again. But even little things like you might want to give yourself a daily boot up checklist. What are the things that I want to think about first thing in the morning before I get maybe sucked into emails? Or a weekly review checklist. What are the kind of things that I want to look at or think about on a weekly basis? And some of those might be like, what's the work and what are my priorities? And maybe what do I need to delete or delegate or be ruthless with? But some of it also might be the things that often fall off the list. So the things that you need to remind yourself about, like, am I getting enough sleep? What am I going to do for fun? How is the team morale and the mood and the stress levels at the moment? So that might also be part of your weekly review checklist. And the beauty of a checklist is you're doing that thinking up front. So you go into boss mode first and deciding what's important to me to pay attention to. And then you can use that when you're in work mode to go and follow through and kind of go, right, that's the things I need to think about, or here are the things I need to do. Speaking of sleep, how much sleep do you get? So I'm told that lions get about 18 hours of sleep a day. Now, I'm not suggesting that you need 18 hours of sleep, but I am asking how much sleep do you get, and do you get enough? So back in the 1980s, we had a lot of world leaders and company leaders who would brag about how little sleep they can get away with so they can create more hours to work in the day. That was a time management tip of the day back in the 1980s. But actually, a lot of our research these days all suggests that actually if we're sleep deprived, we actually, the cognitive impairment to our brain is equivalent to being drunk. And we don't think of turning up to work drunk as a good productivity strategy, right? But how often do we sacrifice on sleep? in order to get a few more things done. It just doesn't work. So a ninja who is constantly in battle is a ninja who will end up defeated. So this might be physical preparedness, where you think, okay, what's going to help me to be at my best? Maybe it's the basic human needs like getting enough sleep, exercising, drinking, hydration, drinking water, nutrition. All of those things that impact on our physical bodies will also impact on our mental well-being and our ability to pay attention to do good work. And that leads me very nicely onto the final one, which is human, not superhero, because we are all human beings, and that means that we're not perfect. And let's go for progress instead of perfection. It means that sometimes we'll make mistakes, but that's okay. That's part of the course of being a human being. And actually, some of our best innovations and our best learning and growth come from mistakes. So let's not be so caught up in avoiding mistakes that we miss out on that. That's actually the topic of my latest book, this one here called Struggle, which looks into what if we've got it all wrong about getting it wrong. So if that's a topic you're interested in, then that would be a good place to go for that. But also it's about taking breaks. So I think we've got another poll, final poll coming up. So Robin, could you launch that poll for us? Because I'd love to know what our lunch break habits are like. Okay, so which of these best describes your lunch break habits? Do you take a dedicated half an hour and an hour away from your desk? Is it more like desk lunch, working lunch for you, or are you thinking lunch, what's that? Okay, yep, so some of you are going lunch, what's that? The rest of you are about half and half between taking a dedicated lunch break and those of you who are working through. If you're not convinced about taking lunch breaks, then look up the research on decision fatigue. And I think that's quite sobering reading into why we need to take breaks. But basically, the spoiler is we can't continue with peak performance if we don't take breaks. If we want our brain to be at its best, we need to make sure that we take breaks and take those seriously. So as human beings, we have human needs. What is it that you need to give yourself in order to be at your best? And do we always give ourselves what we need? So how often do we give ourselves a hard time when what we actually need is a break? How often do we give ourselves distraction when what we really need is attention? So understanding what is it that you need to give yourself and what helps to recharge your productivity as well. So sometimes we see recharging or self-care or well-being as a bit of a luxury that we get around to when everything else is done. But actually we need to start seeing it as fuel for our productivity. And when we do, that's when we'll actually make it happen. So I'm going to pause there. Those are our 9 characteristics. We've got a couple of minutes left. 2 things to do, which one is to take any more questions, and I appreciate we might not be able to answer all of them, but I'm really happy to take as many questions as you'd like. I'm happy to stay around longer. I'm not sure about you, Robin, but also if we don't get around to your questions, really happy for you to get in touch. So this is the link on the screen, and I think Robin will send round the link as well in a follow-up email. So this is where you'll be able to give us feedback and access all the resources that I mentioned. Feel free to come find me on social media, on LinkedIn, or to email me, grace@thinkproductive.co.uk, if there are any further questions that you want to ask me, and if you want to find out about our workshops as well. So, Robin, I think we might have time to take maybe one question.
I think we can probably do one very quick question that has come through. Somebody works nice and quietly at home, but they just want some tips on how to deal with people distracting them in an open plan office now they're starting to return to work.
Yeah, definitely. So it might be, if you have to be in an open office, it might be having certain signals. So it might be a sign, it might to say like almost like an open door, closed door kind of thing, or some people use a traffic light or a flag system. So there's some kind of sign or signal to let people know when it's when you need your brain to yourself and when you're happy to be distracted. Or it might be actually using the open office as the place where you collaborate and maybe have other places that you go to when you can get your head down and focus if that's an option for you.